I'm Greg Vetter. I have a question for you. How many times a day do you think you check your cell? Anyone? 20? Anyone else?
30.
Okay. How many times a day do you think you touch your smartphone? Now, when I say touch, I mean scroll, do this, check something, send an email, play a game, read something. How many times a day do you think you touch your smartphone? Any guesses? Okay, good. How many hours a week do you think you spend doing email? Guesses? Okay, great. So you're sitting there saying, Greg, who cares how many times I touch something? And I'm going to sit there and say it's vitally important, because the more you check something, the more you touch something, the less chance you'll have of producing any real work. So smartphone users on average will check their phone 47 times a day. Now think about that. 47 times a day. That means you're doing something over here, you intentionally interrupt yourself, and then you start going through a cycle of either looking or looking at it and then doing something with it, looking at it, typing back, looking at it, calling. All of a sudden, all you're doing is constantly checking stuff. You're checking every 2 to 3 minutes. People touch their smartphone 2,617 times a day. When are you doing any work? See, when you're checking something, you're not producing work. The top 10% of the folks that are really addicted, and we are an addicted society today, touch a smartphone over 5,000 times a day. I could give you loads of statistics that would make your hair curl, which I won't. Email, 13 hours a week you're spending doing email. That's over 25% of your work week. Now think about that. If you've never been taught a system of what to do with email, how to go through it, how to empty your inbox, how is that going to affect your bottom line or your productivity? It's going to sink. There are very specific ways how to go through and process information. There are very specific ways on how to go through your email. You can actually get it done in a couple minutes. Now, I got some super duper news for you. What we're going to do today is talk about the difference between processing information and producing work. Process versus produce. Without a doubt, it's the absolutely most important thing that I can say to you about the information age and how to become productive. So let's just take a look a second on a typical day. 8 o'clock, you come into work. 2 minutes later, somebody walks in. 3 minutes later, you get a text. Every 2 to 3 minutes during the day, you are constantly interrupted. Well, so what? Well, so what is when you're checking something, you're not producing work. And most of us don't understand that. Years ago, it was pretty simple. We had 2 pieces of technology, a typewriter and a telephone, and everything went into that one desk box. We used to have those pink while you were out slips. Pretty simple. You'd go through your inbox and you're done. Today, you've got roughly 10 to 12 different pieces of technology that are clamoring for your attention. Do me, check me, look at me, all day long. I wanted to talk a little about the cycle of doom. Now, that person looks like they're in pretty bad shape, don't they? I mean, they're literally drowning. But then when I was doing this, I started thinking about a cycle. And I thought, maybe I could use another one. It's a different type of a cycle. This is a wash cycle, but it doesn't matter. I'd say they're both kind of in trouble. So let's take a look at what happens during the day. So you start out, and the more technology you have, and we know we have a lot more technology today, don't we? Sure. We have 10 to 12 pieces of it. The more technology you have, the more information sources you have. The more information sources you have, the more things you need to check. Think what happened years ago with email. We never had it. Now we're spending a quarter of our work week on it. If you don't know how to do this stuff, you're in trouble. So the more things you need to check, the more you'll be interrupted. Every 2 to 3 minutes. The more you're interrupted, the less you'll be able to work. The less you're able to work, the less you're able to produce. Now here's the important part. The less you're able to produce, the greater chance you'll have of taking that long vacation that you always wanted to have. The problem is, you're never coming back because you've either been fired or you were laid off. Why? Because you're spending so much time processing information instead of producing work. And that's you, by the way, in your vacation resort in the red circle. So what is the difference between processing information and producing work? Processing is checking, organizing, categorizing, prioritizing. Think about a mailman in the post office. A big bag of letters, putting them in by zip code, right? He's not opening up the letters and reading them. He's just organizing it. Today, that's what we're spending most of our time doing. We're processing information. However, that's not what you get paid for. You get paid to produce work, to create something. Years ago, we would spend this amount of time producing and this amount of time processing. Today, processing has come up here versus producing, which is dropped here. So what happens? You get up in the morning, what's the first thing you check? Smartphone. During the day, on the way to work, all day long, on the way home, when you get home. And now they're finding that some people will check their smartphone an average of 10 times a night during the night. That's a little bit too much processing. So I've got the super solution for you, and it's pee 6 times a day. Now, why is peeing 6 times? It's kind of funny, but it's an interesting story about that. When I started thinking about this years ago, I had a client here just east of Atlanta called C.R. Baird. And I said to the woman, you know, this sounds a little risque. Will this be okay? And she said, Greg, you do realize what we sell, right? We sell catheters. So I sat and I said, this is perfect. This will be a great way to make my point. So, P. So very first thing in the morning process, lunchtime process, late afternoon process. Between there, produce. So let's look at that just a little bit more. So process the very first thing in the morning. When you come into work, your goal is to look at everything that you have, all information sources, and process it. Could be your smartphone, could be your email, could be your desk inbox, it doesn't matter. Could be your voicemail. So now what you've done, think about that mailman putting that information into a slot. You're now all organized, prioritized, and categorized. But the problem is most of us do that every 2 to 3 minutes. How many times do you get a phone call, stop and look at it? There's an old time management adage that says the amount of time that you are interrupted, say 15 seconds, you have to equal that and put it over here on the other end to refocus yourself. So instead of a 15-second, you now got a 30-second lull in your productivity. But the real bad news is in the last couple of years, they've proved that's incorrect. You now have to add anywhere from 2 to 5 more minutes on every interruption. So that 15-second innocent little interruption has become how many minutes? Why is this important? Because our productivity, despite technology in so many ways, has dropped. Yet we still believe we're actually being more productive. Next time, lunchtime, or right after lunch. Now notice that's a 3-hour break. 3 hours. Nobody is going to die unless they hear from you in 3 hours, unless you're in a customer service position or a sales position. Finally, late afternoon, again. So now what it looks like is first thing in the morning, lunchtime, late afternoon. What could you possibly be doing in between there? How about producing? So first thing in the morning, process. How about producing? That's what you're paid for. So there are 3 ways to produce. So every day you need to look at 3 action categories. The first one being the calendar. Everybody's pretty familiar with the calendar, right? Except we abuse it. We try to get work done by using dates, which is one of the worst ways you can actually work. Then everything is about when is it due versus its impact. So the calendar is legitimate for phone calls, appointments, things that can only be done on a particular date. The second action category in producing during the day that you want to hit is similar tasks or batching. What can you batch? Phone calls, emails, things to pay, anything at all that you can batch. Finally, important tasks. We never have time to do our important tasks. Why? Because we spend most of the day doing what? Processing information. If you're processing information, you're not producing work. So, produce between your process, things that are very important, we don't seem to have time to do. Things that are batched, and things that can only be done on a particular date. So your entire system is right there. PPP, PPP. I'd like to leave you with this one thought. And it's, if you're processing information, you're not producing work. The more you process, the less you'll produce. I want to give you one story before we end today. I got a call years ago from a fellow who was referred to me. He was a lawyer. And he asked me the usual questions, how much, what it entail, and how long. And I went through all the stuff and said, it's usually a one-on-one, takes 2 days. I'm sitting there and he's not saying anything. I'm wondering, what's going on? So finally he said, I'll give you half a day. Well, I've had some interesting sessions with some lawyers because lawyers are skilled at doing what they do well, which is arguing their point, except it doesn't work really well in a change type training. But I was intrigued by this guy, so I said, okay, I'll do it. So I said, I'll come by the following week, got in my car, went here northwest of Atlanta to Marietta, and came to this palatial building. The guy obviously understood something because he was making a lot of money. He was fairly successful. So I kind of prepped myself because I said, I've had some fun times with some of the lawyers, but this guy surprised me. He put his hand out and said, come on in, Mr. Vetter, sit down. Well, I was taken aback a little. So I sat down and we talked a little, and I pulled my chair in and I said, okay, let's get started. He said, whoa, can I just ask you one question, Mr. Vetter, just before we get going? What's the most important thing you're going to tell me today? I said, that's easy. Take 20% of every day at the same time, uninterrupted, and work on your most important things. And we call that a quiet time, a QT. If you take 20% of your workday every day at the same time and work on things that you don't have time to do, because you're doing what? Processing so much, your life will really change. He said, okay, thanks. So I pulled my chair and I said, okay, let's get started. And with that, he held out his hand and had a check in it. He said, thanks, that's all I need. So I knew this was going to be a weird one, and it was. So I was kind of stunned, said goodbye, walked out. He had figured out the most important thing was just to find out what's that one most important thing I can do every day. What you learned today was basically cut down on the number of times that you process. If you do, you'll create about an hour to 2 hours of extra time every day. And guess what I want you to do in that extra hour to 2 hours every day? Take a quiet time. Work on your most important thing every day In your quiet time, make that your priority. Don't make checking everything your priority. If you do, I guarantee your life will change for the better. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.